Hello, this is the A127. It's located mostly in Essex, connecting Romford to Southend-on-Sea, and it's the first purpose-built road in the UK that this year celebrates its 100th anniversary. Hooray! I'm actually a bit late to the party. The official opening date was the 25th of March 1925, and first purpose-built road sounds like bullshit considering the Romans were building roads long before the A127 was a thing. What gives, mister? Allow me to clarify. The A127 is the first road built from scratch with the motor vehicle in mind. Certainly, roads have been around for a long time, but they all started out as horse tracks or old Roman roads, which eventually just became the road. But in the case of the A127, it was built as an entirely new project and road, so I think we can say it's the first purpose-built road for the motor vehicle. So the main question then, why did they bother? Well, back then, people actually wanted to go to Southend. It was fairly popular with East London working folk types, and before the A127, the only ways to get there was via the train, drive along what we know as the A13, or alternatively you could go via Brentwood and Wickford, but either way it was a pain in the arse to drive to, and with motor vehicles growing ever popular, this just wouldn't do. Yeah, but the train? We're not getting the train. However, what I just said was merely something for consideration. The main motivation for building the road was for other reasons. In 1920, the then Prime Minister Lloyd George announced plans to construct several roads in and around London in an effort to create jobs for the thousands of veterans who had fortunately returned home after the first small disagreement of 1914 to 1918. At the time, there wasn't really a lot for them to do, but new roads equals new jobs. Everyone's a winner. The A127 initially wasn't part of their plan, but it was decided to revise the plans a year later in 1921 to add on the 21-mile stretch to Southend. Unlike the other roads being built, this one was to be completely new, and they said it was to be constructed as a perfectly straight road, which, looking at it, they failed to achieve. I imagine when it came to actually building it, stuff got in the way. Because the A127 was a new construction, the ground had to be dug out, which was mostly done by hand, but the hardened veterans made short work of it. Construction began in 1921 with sections of the road ready to go by 1924, and the whole thing was done by 1925. 4 years to build a 21-mile road by hand. Today we spend more time in planning meetings and doing feasibility studies. That said, the road was simpler in construction because it started out as a fairly normal single carriageway road, and on opening this immediately became a problem. With a newly created road, the keen motorists saw it as an opportunity to make some progress, and you'd have had cars barrelling down the road as fast as they could go. Was this the beginnings of the Essex boy racer, perhaps? To be fair, at the time this may only have been, 20 or 40 miles an hour, but stopping these older vehicles can be challenging, and they didn't think about any of this when they designed the road. What you had was several junctions, joining roads, and opportunities for vehicles to pull out in front of you, leading to a high collision rate. It's also worth mentioning that the driving test wasn't a thing until 1934. Furthermore, the Essex clay that the road had been built on turned out to be less stable than they'd have liked, with embankments sinking and the road surface falling apart as a result. By all accounts, this new road was turning into a bit of a disaster, but given it was the first attempt ever, I think we can forgive them. And they didn't just sit about watching things get worse. They got off their arses and sorted it out. The road was repaired, and throughout the late 1920s, sections of the road were upgraded to a dual carriageway, particularly those sections around dangerous junctions. But eventually they thought, sod it, we might as well do the whole thing, right? And by the late 1930s, the entire length of the road had been turned into a dual carriageway. Bonus fact, the central reservation was intentionally wide so that a tram or railway could be installed at a later date, but sadly that never happened. Either way, it was lovely, I'm sure, but unfortunately still just as dangerous because they didn't improve any of the junctions, and there were more vehicles using the road than they'd ever imagined. Further improvements were made throughout the 1950s and 60s, turning the road into the A127 that we're a bit more familiar with. Why don't we take a quick look at some of the changes they made? The idea was to make everything a bit more free-flowing and safer by adding larger proper junctions, a good example of which is the Hall Lane junction. Before, Hall Lane used to just join the A127 without any sort of slip road or run-up, and with cars coming down here at 70 miles an hour for joining traffic, this is far from ideal. So a proper junction was built, and it was definitely designed in the 1960s because it features one of the tightest slip roads I've ever seen. The problem with the A127 is that they didn't go far enough. Literally tens of metres from the elaborate Hall Lane junction is this sack of crap, Tompkins Lane. See how it just joins the A127 without any sort of slip road? Stupid. It's the same on the other side as well, and this junction, if you can call it that, is a good example of how the A127 used to be laid out. Badly, and it's junctions like this that led to them making changes to the road because dangerous. And the reason they didn't go far enough is because there are still several junctions like this along the length of the road. A big change to the A127 came with the addition of the M25, a big motorway that nobody likes. Because of the motorway, the A127 had to be slightly realigned to allow for a junction to be added, and this has resulted in a small piece of the original 1930s A127 dual carriageway being abandoned. You'll have to use your imagination a bit because the road has since been repurposed, but Codham Hall Lane, together with this works area, used to make up the main carriageway of the A127 before the motorway was built. And it's interesting because, as far as I know, it's the only place where you can catch a glimpse of the original A127 before it was upgraded and whatnot. A unique feature of the A127 is known as the Fortune of War roundabout, which is no longer a roundabout and named after a pub that no longer exists. It certainly used to be a roundabout built with the 1930s A127 dual carriageway, and it was a nightmare. It was the first roundabout you'd come to when heading away from London, and what usually happened was drivers would come herring down the road, realising at the last minute that there was a roundabout or queue of traffic, and catastrophe would ensue. Not only that, it was creating a bottleneck for traffic, so the obvious solution was to stick a load of traffic lights on it. Yeah, that'll work. No, it won't, and it didn't. So in the mid-1990s, they removed them and made the roundabout not a roundabout by closing off parts of the road, giving us whatever this is. It hasn't really solved much, and if anything, it's created a new problem where large vehicles can easily overturn, but I think we're stuck with it for now. And there we are, that sums up the A127, I suppose, the first purpose-built road for motorised vehicles that, since the day it opened, right up until today, has been a bit of a troublemaker, hasn't it? Maybe it's been trying to play catch-up with the rising number of vehicles using it every day and struggling to manage, but come on, this is the first attempt, dug out and constructed by hand and finished far quicker than anything we build today. Sure, it's not without its problems, but compared to more recent roads, I don't think it's that bad. Happy 100th, you old bastard. Thanks very much for watching. Like and subscribe and all that bollocks, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care.